Hello and welcome to Fearless in Faith. I'm your host, Esther, and today we're diving into a story that proves God's power to move mountains. Whether you're facing an impossible situation or need a reminder of God's faithfulness, this episode will bless and inspire you. Our guest today is Dr. Rachel Peterson, a medical professional, a stage 4 cancer survivor, and a walking testimony of God's healing power. Dr. Rachel's story is one of courage, unwavering faith, and the power of prayer. Before we hear from Dr. Rachel, let's reflect on these words from Matthew 17:20. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. This verse sets the foundation for what you're about to hear. Now let's welcome Dr. Rachel to the show. Dr. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Esther. It's truly a blessing to be here and share what God has done in my life. Every time I recount this story, I'm reminded of God's faithfulness and the miracles He performs every day. My journey began 4 years ago with what I thought was a simple doctor's visit. I had been experiencing fatigue and persistent discomfort, but as a medical professional, I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress from work. After some tests, the results came back and my world was turned upside down. The diagnosis was stage 4 cancer. As a doctor, I knew the reality of what that meant. Stage 4 is advanced, aggressive, and often considered untreatable. When the oncologist told me there were no effective options left, I was stunned. I remember sitting in that sterile room, holding the report in my hands, and feeling as though the walls were closing in. It was a moment of complete devastation. At first, I was overwhelmed by fear, anger, and doubt. I kept asking God, why me? Why now? I've spent my life helping others, and this is how it ends. I wrestled with these questions for days, unable to find peace. But in the middle of that darkness, something remarkable began to happen. My church family and faith community rallied around me. They refused to let me face this battle alone. People I barely knew were praying for me, sending me scriptures and reminding me of God's promises. I remember one particular evening when a friend called and shared Psalm 46:1 with me. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. That verse brought me to tears because it reminded me that God hadn't abandoned me. He was right there, even in the middle of my pain. One scripture that became my anchor was Matthew 17:20. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. I clung to that verse with everything I had. I told God, I don't know how and I don't know when, but I trust that you can move this mountain of cancer. And even on days when my faith felt weak, I reminded myself that a mustard seed of faith was enough for God to work. There were many hard days. The treatments were painful, and the side effects were debilitating. I often felt like my body was betraying me, and there were times when I wanted to give up. But God met me in those moments. One particular day stands out. I was lying in bed, too weak to move, and I cried out to God, I can't do this anymore. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was as if God was whispering, you're not alone, I'm carrying you. God also sent people into my life at just the right time. A friend from church brought me a prayer journal and encouraged me to write down my fears, prayers, and moments of gratitude. Writing became a lifeline for me. It helped me focus on God's goodness, even when the circumstances were grim. Over time, I began to notice small miracles, things that seemed insignificant at first but were clearly God's hand at work. For example, a nurse who prayed with me during treatments, unexpected financial support for my medical bills, and even moments of laughter with friends that reminded me life was still worth living. And then, the miraculous happened. After months of prayer, treatments, and unwavering support from my faith community, the scan showed something incredible. My cancer was gone. The doctors were speechless. They said, "We can't explain this. It's as if the cancer has completely disappeared." I knew exactly what had happened. This wasn't just a medical phenomenon, it was the hand of God. He had done what seemed impossible. I cried tears of joy and gratitude, thanking Him for the gift of healing. This journey taught me so much about faith. I used to think faith meant never doubting, never being afraid. But I've learned that real faith is trusting God even when you're scared, even when you don't understand His plan. It's about leaning on Him and believing that He is good, no matter what. I also learned the importance of community. I couldn't have done this alone. God placed people in my life to remind me of His love and faithfulness when I couldn't see it for myself. To anyone listening who feels like they're facing an impossible situation, I want to say this: God is still in the business of miracles. Whether your mountain is illness, grief, or uncertainty, trust Him to move it. Even when you feel like your faith is small, remember that a mustard seed is all He needs to work wonders. And finally, don't underestimate the power of prayer. Prayer isn't just about asking for what we want. It's about aligning our hearts with God's will and trusting Him to do what's best. I'm here today because of the countless prayers of people who believed in God's power, even when I couldn't.
Wow, Dr. Rachel, what an incredible testimony. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure many listeners are wondering, how did you keep holding on to your faith when the situation seemed so hopeless?
It wasn't easy, Esther. There were moments when I wanted to give up, but I realized that faith isn't about how we feel. It's about where we place our trust. I surrounded myself with people who encouraged me in my faith and constantly reminded me of God's promises. Worship music and scriptures became my lifeline. I also prayed, even when I didn't have the words. Sometimes all I could say was, "God, I trust you."
That's such a beautiful reminder, Dr. Rachel. Thank you again for sharing your journey with us. Your story is truly a testament to God's faithfulness and His power to move mountains. Friends, what an inspiring conversation. Dr. Rachel's story reminds us that no matter how impossible a situation may seem, God is still in the business of miracles. As we close, I encourage you to reflect on Matthew 17:20. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. And don't forget to tune in next week for another story of fearless faith. Thank you for listening to Fearless in Faith. Until next time, stay rooted in God and never stop believing that He can move your mountains. We'll be back next week with another inspiring episode of Hope and Faith, so don't miss it. Make sure to subscribe to Fearless in Faith on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if today's episode blessed you, share it with your friends, family, or anyone who needs a little hope in their life. Until next time, stay fearless in your faith. See you next week.